solving by completing the square. This is such an important section that we are going to spend 2 days on it. Okay, the first thing that you have to understand is solving a perfect square equation. When you solve a perfect square equation, when you take the square root, remember x equals plus or minus that. So x is equal to 5 and negative 5. Okay, same deal here. You take the square root, x is equal to positive negative square root of 32. Remember, you reduce that, it's 16 and 2, so it's 4 radical 2. So x is equal to plus or minus 4 radical 2. Yes, you can leave it like this. You don't have to separate it. I'm just showing you that. This last one is a perfect square still. But when I take the square root, I don't just stop. I have to keep going. So remember, the square root cancels out the square. So I get positive or negative 144. I mean, just 44. When you reduce 44, it's 2 radical 11. Okay, so that means x minus 2. I don't need x minus 2, I need x, so I have to add my 2. We put the 2 right in front. It's 2 plus or minus 2 radical 11. So that's still a perfect square. It's still a lot easier than doing it any other way, but that's solving. So if you know how to do that, solving, completing the square isn't too bad. Remember, you do have to put that plus or minus symbol the moment you put that square root on. Okay, so there's a lot of perfect squares out there. You know your perfect squares. You know 16 is a perfect square, 81 is a perfect square, but you have binomial perfect squares also. If you're to factor this, here, it's x plus 4, or x plus 4 squared. And that's what we're looking for when we're doing that. We want to create this perfect squareness over here, right here. Once we do that, we take the square root and we solve. Is pretty straightforward. So that's what we're going for when we're completing the square. We want to make perfect square trinomials into perfect square binomials. So try these out if you haven't. And I'm just going to throw up the answers. So notice there, maybe you notice a few things, how this works. This 8, if you look at it, there's a 4. There's negative 6, negative 3, negative 10, negative 5, 4, 2. If you notice that the middle term is always double this one, or to put it in a way that's going to help us out, this 4 is half of the 8. This negative 3, half the negative 6. Negative 5, half the 10. And then this number right here, this 9, 16, 20, those are always perfect squares. And they're this number right here, squared. So when you divided it by 2, you got a 4. And then you squared it, got a 16 right up here. Divide by 2, got negative 3, 9. So there's this pattern here that is the essence, completing a square, making something a perfect square. And we're going to use that to solve equations. So that's how this works. See that 8? Well, if I want to make this a perfect square binomial, I know this guy is going to be a 4. The sign stays the same here and here. But to figure out what this number is over here, well, that you take this number and you square it. So we just created a perfect square binomial and factored it at the same time. So we have to figure out what these two numbers are. Well, take this number, divide it by 2, square it, and put it there. Now notice this number is always positive because I'm squaring negative 2. Whenever you square anything, you always get a positive. So that's important. This one right here keeps the sign, and this one is always positive. So try the rest of these. Well, try this one out, I guess would be it. So x minus 5 and 25. Okay, then we get to fractions. Your favorite. Okay, because when you take this 5 and you divide it by 2, you still can. It's just 5 over 2. Now remember, I need to square that number to put here. So just square the top, square the bottom, done. Okay, so it's not really that big of a deal. Just freaks people out when they first see it. So same deal here. The binomial is x minus 3 over 2. So I take this number, divide it by 2, then I take this one, and I square it. Square the top, square the bottom, done. And then this one is just cheese. I just needed space, apparently. Oh, nice. It's cheese, but I get it wrong. There we go. So remember, this one keeps the sign. This one's always positive. Divide 16 by 2, we get 8. And the 64 is there. All right, so actually completing the square. Reading this will cause you to have, I don't know, problems. It's just, there's a lot. But I'm going to go through each one as I do these problems. So get all terms with the variable on one side. That's step 1. Excuse me, I was trying to expand this. So we're going to look at these steps as we go through this. Get all terms on the variable, with variables on one side and just numbers on the other. Well, this one has everything on the same side. All right, so I need to get the ones with the variables, these two on this side, and this 8 has to move. So remember, when we cross an equal sign, we change signs. There we go. That's step 1. Step 2. On the left side only, factor out a number that will make the x squared coefficient 1. Okay, so when we're solving these, completing the square, it's always a quadratic. So it's always x squared. And this leading coefficient here has to be 1 to do that. So I'm going to factor it out. So I'm going to ignore the other side and just factor out a 2. Just the number. A number. Leave the letters alone. So it's x squared minus 2 here. 2x. And it still equals 8. Okay, we are going to add something to this to make it a perfect square. And that's the whole point of this. I want to add to it to make it a perfect square. So this is the completing the square part. And that's this part up here. That's what we just did. Divide the x term by 2. So take this term, divide it by 2. Now there is a 2 out here. I'm just going to leave it. It's still part of the problem. Bring it down. So x minus 1. So I'm going to then take this number and square it. Positive 1. So now this is the perfect square. If I were to factor this, I would get x minus 1 times x minus 1 squared. X minus 1 squared equals. Now, it doesn't equal 8. Now, I can't just add something. I can't just add something over here. You can't just add something to a side of an equation. Whatever you would add to one side, you have to add to the other. So what we need to do is we take this number. Okay, we take this number here. We multiply times this. Okay, and that's basically what we added. If you were to distribute this back through, it would be exactly this right here plus 2 instead of 1. So I need to add 2 to both sides. So I added 2 over here. Okay, it was 2 times 1. So I need to add it over there. And now I simply solve this equation. So this equation isn't that difficult to solve. It's just getting that. Yay, I'm just playing with your eyes. Divide by 2 first. We get x minus 1 squared equals 5. Take the square root. I'm going to go over here. So it's the square root of x minus 1 squared. I'm just bringing that whole mess up here. Remember, when you put the square root on, that cancels out a square. But then you need the plus or the minus for that radical 5. Then simply add 1. So the solving isn't the hardest part. It's the completing the square that we have to get through. Okay, so just as a reminder. Okay, take this number, divide it by 2. Square it, it goes here, and if there is a number, there isn't always a number out there. You have to take that, multiply it by that, and add it to that side. Okay, it takes practice. This is why we're spending 2 days on it. And then we're done. All right, and then you'll be masters completing the squares. Okay, first step, letters on one side. This guy's got to move. So I'm going to subtract 9. So I have x squared plus 4x equals negative 9. There is the coefficient, the leading coefficient, I guess. I don't know. The leading coefficient here is 1, so we're good. We don't have to factor anything out. All we have to do is make that binomial here. Okay, so we're going to add something to both sides. So remember, we added it here when we were practicing, but we have to, since it's an equation, we have to add it to both sides. So I take this number, divide it by 2, and then take this number and square it and put it on there. So I'm left with a negative 5 over here. And now I simply solve. Take the square root. X plus 2, remember these cancel themselves out, equals plus or minus. Remember that negative under the radical changes to an I. And then subtract 2. X equals negative 2. Remember the negative 2 just goes right up in front. Plus or minus I radical 5. Make sure that I stays with the radical. Is there more? I forget. All right, so we're going to practice this tomorrow and again the next day. Have a good day.